building the mental model of the game in your head, of learning the rules. And as you do that, you move your mouse around, you interact with those pink and blue squares and the little circles, you notice what happens and how they interact with each other. And as you learn the rules, your mind also builds an interpretation of those rules. Like, oh, this means that, the man doesn't really like spending too much time with his wife. He feels a little bit stifled or something. But it doesn't come across in words, which is a brilliant part. It comes across in gameplay. And it's a very interesting and fascinating game, and I think everybody should play it who wants to design games. So, the third thing that games can provide, and this is going to be a hard one to convince some people of, but it's true, they can provide a means of exploring the universe in two different ways. One is for the designers of the game, by exploring different designs and their ramification, and another is for the players of a game by being in this space that's given to them, and by seeing what it's like to move around in there and what happens and what the results are. There's a very interesting aspect of games that's different from all other media that I think will contribute to that question mark, which is that games are formal systems, right? There are software running on a computer, and that's rules that take input data and process it and generate output data. And systems like that are biased toward producing truth, or at least consistency, unless you mess them up with lots of bugs or deliberately corrupt them. To try and put forth a simpler example to make that more understandable, you can think about mathematics. You start with some axioms that are defined or assumed as true, and then you have some rules that you can use to combine those axioms, right? Put them together into equations, rewrite that over and over, and you get different and different equations until eventually you end up with something that makes a statement that must be true that you didn't know when you started, right? And that's how mathematics proceeds. Games are like that, but in a kind of messier, more complicated way, right? Instead of axioms, you maybe have the state of a world, some objects sitting around, and instead of rewrite rules, you have your program that manipulates those objects in the world, either via a physics system or by logical rules or AI rules or whatever, and it flows that world from time step to time step until you end up with a result. And it's kind of up to the designer how much veracity there is in that procession. But that's something I'm going to talk about in later slides. So, as an illustration of understanding the world, here's a picture of a very well-known board game, Go. And it's famous for having this very minimalistic rules. It might be the simplest rules of any game. But it's also very profoundly respected. Many people think it's the greatest game ever made. And the reason is that despite the simple rules, the situations you can get into are very complex and subtle, and you can learn a great deal by trying to become good at Go and trying to win against a good player. And many players report that after playing this for a long time, they feel like they're kind of learning things about the universe, about strength and structure and life from the patterns of the stones. There are Go proverbs, for example, that you might have heard. A famous one is, "Don't throw good stones after bad." That comes directly after common advice for a new Go player. Okay. So the next part of my talk is that just thinking about the ramifications of this. Games are going to be huge, by which I mean that a lot of people are going to be playing them. We maybe think that a lot of people play games now, right? They're pretty popular. But as we're always happy to see, every year the market grows, right? And in the past year, we've seen some extra growth due to some very interesting hardware and software moves. So for example, Nintendo came out with the Wii, and the DS has exploded in popularity, and they're reaching audiences that we wouldn't normally have considered to be gamer audiences. And that's very exciting, because we're going to have more people playing our stuff than ever before. What that means to me is that games are going to be moving more and more to becoming central to our culture. They're going to heavily impact the patterns of human thought, and thus help define what it means to be human, right? 100 years from now, what it means to be human is going to be determined in a significant part by video games. And that sounds like a kind of weird, risky statement to make, but it's obvious. It's obviously true because we have other media right now that have already done this, right? So books, both fiction and nonfiction books, are a fundamental part of what it means to be human today. Think about what your life would be like if there were never any books, right? You never could have learned out of books at school. You wouldn't be literate, right? You certainly wouldn't be sending email on a computer, right? We would be in a totally different situation, certainly not at this conference, right? So books have been important, right? And the development of that medium has been important. Film, to a more subtle degree, and it's a newer medium, but yes, that also. Most of us have seen a large number of films and a lot of hours of television, and that visual language of composition and proceeding through scenes informs us. And when we visualize things on our own, apart from a film, right, the way that we visualize has been informed by what that film showed us, or what all those history of films that we've seen have showed us. So again, I would like to come back to the point that all games teach, and if games are going to be one of the foundations of human thought in the future, we really need to think about what those games are going to be teaching all these people that we're selling them to, right? And again, the question is not if it's teaching them something, because games by definition teach. The only question is what. What do they teach the audience? And I have a concern here. My concern is that game designers of today lack discernment when we're thinking about whether our game is good or bad, right? The way we evaluate a design, usually, is by looking at whether a lot of people want to play our game. If they play it and they report that they're having fun, we're like, hey, that's a good game. You know, if they say they're not having fun, maybe we sometimes say that they just don't understand it or something. But in the scope of the larger industry, that's the metric. It's like, if it's a fun game, a lot of people want to play, it's a good game. Otherwise, it's probably not that good of a game. As designers, we don't tend to care why people want to play our game. We certainly don't apply any method of critique to that. And I'm going to claim that that means that we don't show concern for our players' quality of life. And here's what I mean by that. We have a number of tools to keep players playing our game. The majority of them fall into one category, and that is scheduled rewards, right? We give players things to mark their progress. And this is part of that communication process even that I was talking about earlier. A game communicates to you that you're proceeding toward a goal by giving you rewards as communication that you're doing well. But sometimes those rewards can be gratuitous and extraneous, right? So some examples of rewards are collectibles, got to get all of something in a game. Unlockables, so you play the game enough and it gives you new characters or something. An advancing story, so maybe there's gameplay and then there's a plot, and you want to play through the game and beat the boss monster so you can see what happens to Joe when he goes through the next door, right? And then now we've got these achievements, which are like an extra layer on top, right? Where you hand somebody a little medal when they beat the boss monster so that they feel extra good about it and can show that to their friends. And sometimes we take this really far. So massively multiplayer games, for example, are notorious for having relatively empty gameplay, but also being very addictive, right? They keep players hooked with constant fake rewards. And I say fake rewards because, an MMO will give you gold or experience points or extra levels or nice equipment or something, but we all know that as soon as you get enough of that to have advantage over the monsters you're trying to fight, then it's going to make those monsters not very valuable to fight, and now you need to fight stronger monsters that exactly match your new power. So the rewards are actually illusionary, and this creates what designers and players call the treadmill, right, or the grind. The rewards are a way of lying to the player so that they feel good and keep playing our game when in fact nothing real has changed. And this can get really extreme, right? Like we know, we've all heard of guys in Korea and China dying, from playing MMOs for 5 days straight or however long. That's certainly not good. But I'm also going to say that this element, in a less nefarious way, pervades like all of our game design. Even in cases where players aren't dying, even when they report that they like a game, I'm claiming that it's still bad. So there are a lot of different ways to make a game fun. But because we don't understand games very well as designers, we usually pick one of the easy ways to make a game fun,